All right, folks, I want to welcome everybody back to another edition of Fitz News Month in Review, the show where we do it live. And I promise y'all, one day we're going to come on this show and we're going to have just a start to finish episode of how wonderful South Carolina's system of criminal justice is, how our courts are just laden with integrity and watching out for the people and protecting victims, and that our law enforcement is
Are you
honestly.
insinuating that's not going to be this episode, Will?
That is not going to be this episode, folks, at all. And in fact, unfortunately, it seems to be that it's never the case when we come on the air. And not to say that there aren't folks in those systems doing good stuff, but we are diving into some stories today that are very concerning, stories we've been covering over the past month. Before we dive in, though, I want to say a few quick thank yous. First of all, everybody who subscribes to us at fitznews.com. Your support is what empowers us, not only what we do, all the equipment, all the tech, but us. You are the ones who keep us in business. So I want to thank them. Also, no contractual obligations to speak of today for this show. If you want to advertise with us, we'd love to have you. But a few quick notes. I do want to thank some folks who have supported us over the years. Lexington Medical Center here in the Midlands region of South Carolina. I want to thank Justin Bamberg, the People's Rep, Bamberg Legal down there in Bamberg, South Carolina. I want to thank Future Scholars, the 529 savings program that's run by State Treasurer Curtis Loftus and Lauren Taylor Law. We're going to talk about her in just a moment, one of our great legal experts who has been so generous with her time contributing to our coverage. We're going to talk about her in just a moment, but thanks to all of them. But again, most importantly, thanks to all of you supporting what we're doing. I want to bring Jen Wood in here, our research director. Jen, we said it was going to be a big week on the Murdoch front. We weren't kidding. It was a big week, and specifically a big filing from the Office of Attorney General Alan Wilson. The state of South Carolina, represented by the Attorney General and by lead prosecutor Creighton Waters and his team, finally, at long last, submitted their response to the appeal entered by Alec Murdoch and his attorneys last year. And we want to dive into this because it's significant. First of all, it took forever for them to do this. This was a dog ate the homework situation, months and months and months of delays. They finally got this thing in. But it's also worth noting, Jen, we're sitting there watching the clock earlier this month. This thing was due on August 8th. Everyone assumed it would be due close of business August 8th, but they ran it right up to midnight, didn't they, Jen?
Yeah, I was, in the system all afternoon, hitting refresh, waiting for it because I knew it was coming. I assumed close of business was when it would appear, and it did not appear in the system until after the weekend, actually.
You were like a crack-addled lab rat on that computer hitting that refresh button. They finally submitted it. And I wanted to...
You could probably hear me from your office.
What was it? Well, they finally submit this thing, okay? And so what I want to ask you is, what do we think of it? Because the appeal from Murdoch, whatever you think of Alec Murdoch, whatever your perspective on this case, it was a very substantive pleading. And it was substantive with regard to the jury tampering allegations, jury rigging allegations that have been leveled in this case, but also substantive on several other points. Clearly, the state had a high bar to meet in terms of responding to it. Jen Wood, did they meet it?
Well, it was a 182-page filing. It exceeded their page limit, so they had to file a request to exceed the page limit. To me, it was nothing in it was unexpected. It was exactly what I thought. They downplayed the jury tampering allegations against Becky Hill. I think the one part that did surprise me is how heavily they leaned into just how guilty Alex was. He is guilty. The evidence is stacked up against him. This conviction should not be overturned because of how guilty he is. To me, and we'll talk about this later, related to another case that I covered is, guilt, which, I think the majority of people think he is guilty. has very little impact on if the, if the process was right, if he got a fair trial. But when it comes down to it, it's going to come down to what standard the Supreme Court justices decide to utilize when making that decision. And there are more beyond the jury tampering. There are other aspects in that filing, very credible points of appeal. But it's going to come down to what the justices decide, and if they decide to punt it to Federal Court of Appeals.
Well, they do lean heavily on the guilt. You're right, stressing that, which I agree with you. The evidence very strong, and certainly Alec Murdoch did himself zero favors by taking the stand and basically getting caught in a lie. Prosecutor Creighton Waters, I think we can all agree, did a masterful job of leading him down that path to revealing himself to be a liar, not only at every phase of that investigation, but there on the stand during the trial, actively lying to the jurors right there. So I think they did a great job
if
on
that. All goes his way and he gets a new trial, all of those lies will be admissible, at least in their testimony or in a transcript form, rather, into a new trial, even if he doesn't take the stand.
Right.
Yeah. But
So
the three of us
sitting here, himself in the foot.
But my point, though, is the three of us sitting here talking about it, people talking about it all over the country on podcasts and TV interviews, wherever. All of this conversation about it, we weren't the ones, though, tasked with the determination of guilt. And this is where I think it gets very important to, as you mentioned, Jen, focus on the process, because there were 12 people who were tasked with making that determination. One of them, under oath in front of former Supreme Court Chief Justice Jean Toll, said the comments by Clerk of Court Becky Hill, I heard them, they were improper, and they influenced my decision. 3 other jurors said, yes, we heard them, they didn't influence our decision, but yes, we heard them. And then beyond that, we've got one juror, literally hours before these verdicts are handed down, removed under what I can only say at best are questionable, potentially corrupt circumstances. And this was a juror who, according to her version of events, would not come off the ball and say where she was on the case. And because of that, they viewed her as a holdout, had her kicked off. So yes, guilt matters. It's incredibly important, but the people who were assigned to make that determination were tainted. They were tainted, and perhaps even worse than that, Jen.
Yeah. I mean, it is what it is. We have people testifying under oath that said that she influenced the verdict, and I just can't get past that. I can't personally. I want to
prosecutors can't. What did they call it, Jen? What were those? Foolish and
fleeting. Yeah. I mean, do I want to see another trial? No. No, I don't. It was a long 6 weeks. I don't think it'll be that long if we do have another trial, but it is, the process matters. And I just don't think that we can truly say he got a fair trial based on what we've learned in the aftermath.
Well, Jen, you sat down with Lauren Taylor. We mentioned her just in the open. Great supporter of this media outlet, but also brilliant legal mind who has been breaking down a lot of these evidentiary decisions and court rulings that will impact whether or not Alec Murdoch gets a new trial. But you spoke with her about the state's response. What was her take? What did she think of the strength of the state's arguments?
I think she had a very similar opinion to me. I love talking to her, though, because she is an actual attorney and can break down the whys of why they responded that way. I don't think they had any other option but to respond that way. It's kind of what I predicted in my preview piece, and she agreed with that. And she also mentioned, so I did that big article on those text messages that the jury did not hear in the official timeline that was presented to them. And whether or not the defense had received those text messages. And we talked a lot about the state had said, when the defense came back and said, we never saw these text messages, the state came back and said, well, it went through what's called a taint team review because Murdoch is an attorney. And we talked a lot about that pushback from the state. And to her, it didn't make much sense. That explanation didn't track with what the defense should have received. But, you know, at this point, those text messages are not a part of that appeal. They would have to file an amended appeal to get those in. So that's going to be whether or not they determine to do that, whether that's part of the process or if they're just going to respond to what the state has responded, which is the next step.
Let me bring Dylan in to ask you this before we talk about the next steps. Let me bring Dylan in to ask this, because Dylan, I think you made a good point regarding these text messages, the ones that were not presented to the jury, were not part of the timeline. But you made an interesting point, Dylan, in discussing how Murdoch's lawyers responded to those text messages, focusing on what they said versus what they didn't say. Tell us a little bit about that from your perspective, Dylan.
Yeah, I noticed that they had said that they did not see them. They did not go out and make the allegation, we were never provided with these, which is a very different, you know, obviously both of them will get your headline to pop all across Fox News and every other news outlet for a day. But one of those is a very serious allegation, and the other is, I missed it.
Yeah. Well, and it was interesting because in fairness to Murdoch's attorneys, a lot of the data that they were presented, there were some significant pieces of evidence that were buried. And I don't know if it was deliberate. I don't want to cast aspersions on the integrity of the AG's office in this case, but there was a key piece of critical forensic evidence that was completely undermined by files that were buried in the 1 terabyte of data that was turned over to Alec Murdaugh's attorneys. And that was critical in this trial, because it was basically the piece of evidence that convicted Alec Murdaugh in the court of public opinion, which was the blood spatter evidence, which according to his attorneys was basically the result of some hot boxing SLED agents traveling all over the country and getting witnesses in a position where they felt pressured, allegedly, according to Dick Harpootlian. But as we look at this case moving forward, Jen, there's all of this conspiracy chatter out there about, was this trial on the level? Was this investigation on the level? And I've got to ask you this. Do you believe that the way that investigators and prosecutors have handled the allegations of jury tampering and potential jury rigging, do you believe that the way they've handled it builds faith in the credibility of their investigation, or has detracted from the credibility of their investigation?
Man, I love when you ask me a question you already know the answer to. No, I don't, because we have seen charges filed against Becky Hill, but absolutely none of those charges and none of the investigation results that we have seen indicate that they have looked into the jury tampering. And, you know, I know that they have finally interviewed Myra Crosby, who was, you know, known as the egg juror for a very long time.
The one who was kicked off at the last minute.
Right. Yeah. Finally, after much pressure, did sit down and interview her. From what I have heard, it was kind of a disappointing interview. So, yeah. You know what?
Well,
no, I don't have a lot of faith. I mean, I think there's a lot of political careers on the line tied to this verdict. I think there's a lot of posturing, and to me, I want to have faith in our system of justice. I do, and I don't after this month. It's at its lowest point.
Yeah, which is saying something, because we weren't exactly dealing with a system bursting with public confidence to begin with heading into this trial. In fact, if you followed Fitz News and covered Fitz News, you'll know that going into this trial, we pointed out this is a case that South Carolina has to get right because of these chronic issues with its.
But I think that if you talk to a lot of people right now, I mean, just judging by what I see on our comments and just with the many people I speak with, you could tell them everything that we just discussed and they'd go, yeah, they got it right.
Yeah. Well, that's true. Yeah. Fair enough. Well,
it's an opinion. It's okay.
Yeah. And when our nuts end up in the Sixth Amendment sling and, we want to say, well, the Sixth Amendment doesn't matter, then okay, well, that's a republic I don't want to live in. But at any rate, Jen, talk about the timetable moving forward, though, because this is something that is unfolding. there will
Right.
be a response from Murdoch's attorneys to what the state submitted, correct?
Right.
What
Lauren
happened?
Taylor kind of described the process as it's like a tennis match. It just, bouncing the ball back and forth. And, people are very impatient, including me. But it's a process. It takes time. The defense had initially 10 days to respond to the state's response. They asked for a 20-day extension and to exceed the page limit. And the Supreme Court agreed to that extension, also agreed to allow them to exceed the page limit, but said, do not go overboard. We don't want you to rehash your arguments that you made in your initial appeal filing. So they are getting that extension. It will be due back on September 8th. I'll be sitting here refreshing, awaiting the response. Whether or not they will file an amended appeal, I have no clue. But we're keeping an eye on things to see if that happens. But yeah, that looks like the timetable, and then we get a response or response. It's a process.
All right. And obviously the clock ticking, the Supreme Court, which inherited the Murdoch fiasco, whatever we want to call this thing at this point, this massive, sprawling legal phalanx of cases, civil, criminal, you name it. The court which inherited it under former Chief Justice Don Beatty, obviously not the court which is currently comprised, which is led by Chief Justice John Kittredge, but we also have a Supreme Court election coming up next March for another justice who, again, depending on how fast this thing moves, could be off the bench next July. So obviously we're keeping an eye not only on the paperwork flying between these attorneys, but keeping an eye on the 5 justices who will ultimately be asked to resolve it. And Jen, as you have frequently pointed out, what happens in state court is not the end of the matter. Alec Murdoch has a federal case to make regarding this 6th Amendment issue in the event it doesn't go his way at the state level. But folks, if you have followed this story from the moment this crime occurred, the double homicide at the heart of this just tragic Southern Gothic tale, Fitz News first to report on that, but we have been at the forefront, the tip of the spear of every major development in this case. We will continue to do that. Our news team bringing you the very latest, not only in the news that's breaking, but the analysis of it and the fallout from it. But Jen, I want to shift gears with you as we look at another case here in South Carolina that has folks really scratching their heads over the integrity of the justice system. Certainly in Murdoch's case, we can argue, hey, they got it right, maybe through the wrong methods. But the case we're about to talk about, the case of Michael Pearson, you were in court this week in Clarendon County when a man who had been in prison for a decade and a half walked out of a courtroom a free man. Jen, I want you to tell us about this case. Tell us what happened. Why did he end up in jail? Why was he let out? And perhaps most importantly, should it have happened years ago?
Yes. So Michael Wilson Pearson out of Clarendon County was convicted in 2012 of the assault and robbery of Edward Slick Gibbons. A group of 3 individuals assaulted Gibbons. They duct taped his head, stole his El Camino, and in the aftermath, the investigation, Michael Pearson was arrested, charged, and tried and convicted by a jury. Now, the evidence that convicted Pearson was one single fingerprint on the outside of that El Camino. Another co-defendant that was convicted of this crime was convicted based on DNA that was found on the duct tape wrapped around his head. In the years that have followed, Michael Pearson has never backed down from the fact that he was not involved in this crime. He did not know Gibbons. He did not know any of the individuals who were alleged to have committed this crime with him. He had never met them. He filed an appeal with the South Carolina Supreme Court, and in 2016, that appeal, his conviction was overturned by the Court of Appeals. The state of South Carolina filed a writ to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court reversed that decision. So he had this little bit of hope for a while that he was going to get out. He subsequently filed a post-conviction relief application that was denied. And in 2022, co-defendant Victor Weldon took a plea deal in this crime. And during the course of those hearings, told the court that Michael Pearson had nothing to do with this crime, that he had never met him, and that he was wrongfully convicted. Here's the thing,
they polygraphed him and everything, didn't they?
They polygraphed him. Here's the thing. 2022 that happened. Michael Pearson was not released from prison until 2025. In fact, nobody told him that came out.
Wow.
He filed his own post-conviction relief application in 2023, this handwritten application. His case, so on his prison tablet, the North Carolina Center for Actual Innocence, which I think is interesting. I learned this yesterday. They got their website to be added to the tablets, and he found the North Carolina Center for Actual Innocence and filed in 2023 for help. They reviewed the case. They took that case on, and in June of this year, filed an amended post-conviction relief application with so much more detail that the solicitor, they alleged, had known about it, had approached Pearson with a potential deal to get out of prison, but only if, this is alleged, only if he agreed to leave Clarendon County, not come back there, and not to sue the state of South Carolina.
Wow.
Yeah. So
but then there was another plea related to this with another
individual
who testified the same thing, that the guy was not there.
Same thing. They put him under a polygraph. He passed the polygraph. This has been going on for years, yet nobody has bothered to tell the court, tell Michael Pearson that there was evidence that he wasn't guilty. It was just heartbreaking. So yeah, these great attorneys, Chris Muma and James Babb from Center for Innocence in North Carolina took on the case. And finally, after much back and forth, after filing 3 amended PCR applications, Solicitor Finney filed a Rule 29 motion to vacate the conviction. And that was what was heard yesterday in front of South Carolina Circuit Court Judge Robert Hood. And honestly, it's hard to describe that hearing, because usually when you go to a court hearing, especially criminal court, the mood it's somber. And, Michael walked in his prison orange jumpsuit, and his family clapped. It was jubilant. Gibbons' family was there, which, reminded me a lot about what they've been through. Right. He's since died. And, Pearson's attorney said that, despite, the hearing today, that it's not lost on them what they've gone through in this process. But the judge vacated his conviction, granted him a $50,000 PR bond, with the one condition that he not contact the Gibbons family. And Pearson chuckled and said, "Never met them. I would not contact them." And said, Judge Hood said that he would have everything completed by the end of the day so he could walk out of court. So here's the thing, though. Solicitor Finney had a real tough time saying that Pearson was innocent. He said that he did not want to say that because they were still investigating. There were still suspects that had not been arrested in this crime. And Pearson's attorney, Chris Muma, said, "I don't know why innocent, why this is such a bad word. We want you to say that this man is innocent. We want you to expunge his record, let him move on with his life." I think she said, "Innocent is a beautiful word. I don't know why you won't say that." And the judge said that the PCR hearing was scheduled for September 29th and 30th, and he wanted Solicitor Finney to make a decision whether or not he was going to retry Pearson by then. Muma said, "We are pulling the post-conviction relief application, but we want that decision made by then anyway." Yeah. He walked out of court out of the courthouse in his regular clothes. I had brought a change of clothes for him. It was pretty cool. It was.
When you mentioned Jen, you said you were simultaneously inspired and outraged by this
Yeah,
hearing.
it was a really weird feeling because like on one hand you're like, you know, watching somebody walk free for the first time in 15 years, you're just like, wow, how cool is this? But then I'm like, 15 years, this man has been in prison for 15 years. And he said during the press conference, before they convicted him, they told him they knew he was innocent. You know, and that feeling, his mom and his dad have both died in that 15 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just one of those situations where you're like, who is going to be held accountable for this? And especially these past 3 years when it's been known that there's evidence indicating he is not innocent.
Well, that's the question. That's the next question. Obviously, there's no way in hell they're going to try this guy again, given everything that has gone on here. But
they wouldn't get an indictment.
Yeah, the question now is what happens to Solicitor Finney? Obviously, he is not running for re-election as the Third Circuit solicitor, but the question becomes, was this guy guilty of perhaps a criminal act here by refusing to disclose this information? And is there a potential case to be made against him? I don't know if misconduct in office is a potential charge that could be pursued, but he messed up. He messed up in a big way. At the very least, go to the court and say, hey, we've got this evidence. Let the guy know that. This guy found out. When did he submit, Jen, his handwritten post-conviction one? It was 2024.
June of 2023.
Oh, okay.
June. So it's been out there a hot minute. And yeah, and I think listening to Finney avoid the word innocent, all I could think was, if he says he's innocent, if he says he is not going to retry him, is that when the civil liability comes in? Is that when, because that would be my guess why they're so ardently avoiding that word.
When Finney has denied the allegations against him regarding the conditional release negotiations, he said he has not attempted to negotiate with Pearson regarding lawsuits against the state regarding where he lives. He claims that those allegations are false. Obviously, we will continue to track this, but I would be shocked if there weren't some sort of an investigatory referral involving the Third Circuit solicitor regarding this case. Jen, I want to credit you for your work on this. We were not the news outlet to break this. I want to give credit where it's due. The Charleston Post and Courier, I believe, were the first to report on this, so credit to them. But Jen, you took this story and really ran with it, and so much credit to you for your work on this one. And please keep us posted as this moves forward, and hopefully we can get an update for our audience in the next episode about where this case has gone. But once again, further evidence that justice in South Carolina tends to be
yeah, I mean, here's the thing is, when I looked at this case, I thought this is why the process matters.
Yeah.
We get a lot of pushback on Murdoch because he is just so contemptible. He's in prison for so many other crimes, but this is why the process matters, and this is why it's so important to look at these things objectively.
Yeah. And Jen, I don't think it's lost on anybody that the group that helped this guy go free had to come in from North Carolina. I don't think it's lost on anybody that happened.
No, and that was actually mentioned in the post-release press conference. How disappointing it is that a legal team from another state had to come and ensure justice was enacted in South Carolina, and it's heartbreaking, it's sad, and it's frustrating.
Keep us posted, Jen. This is a big story. You've done amazing work on it. Let us know what we have. We're going to bring our Andy Fancher in here. And once again, Andy, it's one of those things we'd love to say this was a month where South Carolina's police officers just protected and served and upheld the law without fear or favor. But we're not dealing with that this month again, Andy, are we?
Man, every month I hop on and let South Carolina law enforcement know that we're watching. And every month, a cop says, "Hold my beer." And in the immortal words of Johnny Paycheck, I got 15 beers. So, yeah, we got a Lollapalooza of badges gone bad this month, just as last month and the month before that. And, I'll challenge South Carolina law enforcement. Stop deputizing, stop promoting, stop transferring the worst of the worst, and I'll stop talking. But that's not what happened this month. And without further ado, let's go into our recap. Just our little carousel.
I love it when Andy's got the printouts. I love it.
At some point in time, we've got to get color in this office. But for the time being, in this month alone, these are just the officers that we know about. We've got, this is in Chesterfield County. This is McBee Police Officer Captain Gregory Block, who was arrested by SLED for misleading authorities during a child abuse investigation, all the while allegedly engaged in a sexual relationship with the child's mother. Now, Jody Barr, as you noted, we give credit where it's due. Jody Barr of Queen City News, previously WIS, such as myself, he approached Mr. Block as he was packing up his police cruiser after posting bond. Quote, "I have never did anything. Nothing, man." And he proceeds to tell Jody, "Please keep in mind, I got kids. You understand what I'm saying?" In accordance with our tour of South Carolina, we've got in the Grand Strand region, Horry County, Myrtle Beach, police canine handler Aaron Alston. This gentleman was charged with domestic violence, appears to involve a pregnant woman. While this is wholly unremarkable, this is not one bad apple at Myrtle Beach PD, because this time last year, I wrote on Christopher Turner, a fellow MPPD canine handler, also charged with domestic violence. According to SLED agents, because MPPD referred that one out to SLED, it appears as though Mr. Turner assaulted his spouse under the watchful eye of a surveillance camera. But fear not, folks, because that case was disposed. Then, if we travel the coastline just a little bit, you might find yourself in Berkeley County, where we find another one bad apple, just one bad apple, folks. And I think, Will, you designated this mugshot the Zoinks mugshot, perhaps mugshot of the year. This would be
Zoinks.
Now former Berkeley County Sheriff's Office Deputy Jeff Wilson. Mr. Wilson's arrest was expected in specific circles of the Low Country region of the the law enforcement arenas. You see, earlier last week, a flyer was syndicated by Mount Pleasant of surveillance camera photos depicting a man who looks just like this guy, accusing the guy who looks just like this guy of exposing his genitals in a coffee shop. Officers furthermore noted that the individual appears to go by the name Jeff, such as Jeff Wilson, and that he was a frequent of that coffee shop. So if you are going to expose your genitals in a coffee shop, maybe don't
do it at one where you're a
you
regular.
always go to.
Hello.
And maybe don't use your name on the order. I don't know.
Like they write his name on the cup.
Yeah, that's after. No, before he allegedly pulls his genitals out. So fear not, though. He was terminated once BCSO found out that he was the subject of a criminal investigation. You can't make some of these allegations up, but you also can't avoid the fact that Jeff is not the first badge gone bad to hit Berkeley County. I mean, that was a jump scare mugshot. Yes, ma'am. It's as if he like woke up in the detention center. Like, did he not know where he was at? nonetheless, this is not the first badge gone bad in Berkeley County. I mean, just earlier this year, I had reported on a detention center deputy of the year, no less, Avery Smith, the son of a BCSO lieutenant, who was sentenced to 10 years in prison for essentially using the Hill Finklia Detention Center as a groping shack. That arrest and subsequent conviction was made possible by at least 9 women. So those are 9 women that prosecutors know about. But fear not, though, because Avery Smith's supervisors were fired. Both of them were fired. They, of course, were later charged by SLED. I have no clue what the outcome of their cases are, or if there even is one right now. But this just kind of speaking to the tainted orchard that I emphasize so much. And that orchard is not limited to Kershaw County, where this week we reported that they're down at least one deputy over at KCSO. This is a Midlands Region Sheriff Department. It is adjacent to one of the largest counties in South Carolina, Richland County. So this is Leon Lott's next door neighbor. Kershaw County Sheriff's Department lost Joreen JoJo Watson, the gentleman on the left here. On the right, we've got Sheriff Lee Bone. Left, we've got JoJo Watson. This 26-year-old hunk was terminated after, according to separation papers, KCSO papers, he admitted to operating his patrol car after ingesting alcohol. All right, emphasis on the timeline, because we're receiving information suggesting that KCSO severely downplayed some of the allegations against Mr. JoJo. But nonetheless, JoJo, according to separation papers, admitted to ingesting alcohol before driving his county-issued patrol car.
Didn't they search that car, Andy? Didn't they search?
As a matter of fact, they did, and they found open containers in his squad car. They found, I believe, an empty handle of vodka as well as empty cans. Now, if this were anybody else, yeah, Will, if that were you or me or Dylan, I have a feeling we would have been popped for open container.
We'd
right?
be given the Zoinks mugshot.
We'd be looking. Where's Jeff? Where's Jeff? Yeah, we'd be looking something like this. That would be us. I mean, it's a misdemeanor. It is a misdemeanor to operate your vehicle with open containers.
Yep.
Unless you're JoJo Watson. Because JoJo, after admitting to ingesting alcohol before driving his patrol car, which it appears as though there's a whole lot more to that, and after 2 captains found empty containers in his squad car, what did KCSO do? They terminated him for an internal policy violation, not involving misconduct.
So this is the kind of thing that will allow him to go get another job.
Right. I was just going to ask that.
Correct. He is of good moral turpitude and compass and can go apply, if he hasn't already, to another law enforcement agency in the state of South Carolina.
But
so
this
I guess we'll
happens
get to
all
see
the
you report
time,
on him
Andy.
again.
What's that?
Andy, talk about this, because this happens all the time.
Well, it doesn't only happen all the time, and I not only report on it all the time, but this is, especially at KCSO, a pattern. You see, JoJo is not the first person who I have assailed for being separated from KCSO, either for reasons not involving misconduct or no reason at all. You see, earlier this year, we had David Jordan. Notice how this is a mugshot. We had David Jordan's arrest. Now, David Jordan's arrest stems from something he allegedly did, heavy-handed policing, while at the Springdale Police Department. But why am I bringing up David Jordan? Because 4 years ago, he was allowed to resign from the Kershaw County Sheriff's Office after Lee Bone was made aware of multiple use of force reviews recommending this guy's termination. But instead, amid those use of force reviews percolating to the top, this gentleman was either allowed or simply resigned, enabling him to remain in law enforcement and later get arrested by SLED for the same thing that those use of force reviews were accusing him of doing. Now, do you think the buck stops at KCSO with Mr. Jordan? Because just last year, I was in court for the trial of former KCSO deputy Jonathan Goldsmith. Jonathan Goldsmith was ultimately found guilty of second-degree assault and battery and misconduct in office for an incident that occurred in October of 2020. It was a suspicious vehicle call that ended with Mr. Goldsmith permanently disfiguring a man. You can, I mean, the body-worn camera video, the findings from the attorneys, because this guy was the impetus for 5 civil lawsuits accusing Bone of openly condoning and in some cases endorsing Goldsmith's excessive use of force. In fact, during litigation on one of those many lawsuits, because this gentleman right here cost Kershaw County taxpayers somewhere to the tune of $1.5 million in civil litigation, they discovered a video on Lee Bone's iPad titled Goldsmith's Greatest Hits.
Oh, boy.
According to the court filings that we have obtained and that we reported on months and months and months ago, this Goldsmith's Greatest Hits program was edited by Lee Bone himself. And what it is a montage of extremely violent football tackles played over Nelly's Here Comes the Boom, a song that goes, here comes the boom, here comes the boom. And after X amount of booms, we see Jonathan Goldsmith's boom. This is KCSO. This is the month that we've had in law enforcement. And it's the story that never ends. And, you know, sure, one can argue these are just a few bad apples, but I will always count. These are just a few bad apples that we know about. All right. Yeah. How many slip through the cracks? How many folks like Mr. Wilson over here? All right. Because we're the only people to report that this guy's even been arrested.
Yeah.
So either mainstream media doesn't care, or they want to remain invited to the press conferences by these sheriff's departments so that they can keep you interested and keep you in tune to the commercial break, because that's all MSM is, y'all. I can attest as somebody who used to work in it myself. Right?
Yeah. God forbid you interrupt their cookie cutter reports of the latest violence live at 6. Suspect,
or food
whatever.
Trucks. Yeah, or food trucks, or, you know, here's a church fundraiser, or hey, look at what this PE coach did over here. But I would say too that MSM has not failed more than in Spartanburg County. Now, anybody who has followed our coverage for any extent of time knows that Spartanburg County is a place that I hold near and dear to my heart. Not because things are happening in Spartanburg that aren't happening all over the state, but because we've got faces to names to allegations in Spartanburg. And, you know, I mean, I talk with law enforcement officers on a daily basis, both in Spartanburg and beyond. And at least the folks I'm speaking to concur. We had no clue it would get so dark, so vile, so corrupt, and so deep so quickly.
Well, Andy, that's not all you got in Spartanburg. There's literally a new sheriff in Spartanburg, because the current sheriff is now out of a job amid multiple criminal investigations, in large part thanks to reporting that you've done. So what's the latest in Spartanburg, though? Tell us, this past month, obviously a bunch happening. What's the latest out of Spartanburg, Andy?
Well, sure. And you know, for a brief recap, although I don't think somebody like Chuck Wright needs an introduction. I mean, this was one of the longest serving sheriffs in South Carolina history. He was on his 5th term as sheriff to one of the largest counties in South Carolina, a constitutional sheriff who allegedly was all for your guns so that he could take them, who was allegedly all for you getting prescription medication so he could take them, and was allegedly all for you donating to the benevolence fund so he could abuse it. Notice how I said allegedly, prefacing all of that, but just go read the coverage. Because gone are the days of pleading ignorance on Chuck Wright. The information is out there. All you got to do is Google. All right. Yeah. Yes, we've got a new sheriff in town, and I would say thanks large in part to the fact that one of Chuck's, as deputies describe it, longtime friends, decided to throw his hat in the ring to be the next sheriff of Spartanburg County, which that would be, of course, Spartanburg County Coroner Rusty Clevenger. This fella had clocked years with the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office. He joined back in the mid-1980s alongside Chuck Wright. I mean, this is a gentleman, the coroner of Spartanburg County, who knew Chuck Wright for some 40 years. In fact, Rusty Clevenger here, his brother clocked 30 years with the sheriff's office. His father was the chaplain at the sheriff's office for over a decade. Which folks familiar with our coverage will know that there's a lot not passing the smell test with the Chaplain's Benevolence Fund. In fact, one of the his father's predecessor is currently listed as a suspect. A chaplain is listed as a suspect. Man, we have fallen on bad times in Spartanburg County. But yes, this gentleman here, who's widely understood to be a member of the same law enforcement establishment that has enabled years of criminality, flagrant criminality. I mean, we have been on the scene in Spartanburg, at least I have, like uber focused on Spartanburg for about a year, okay? Because that's when Chuck Wright appears to have violated state nepotism laws by deputizing his son, Andy Wright. Pause, because I've got a great photo for that. So yeah, we first got on the scene back in July of last year. This is, of course, Chuck Wright's son, Andy Wright, standing with Chuck's longtime ally, Governor Henry McMaster. And if you don't believe that Henry McMaster was an ally to Chuck Wright, I'd like to remind folks that as a federal grand jury was being impaneled to hear evidence against Chuck Wright, Henry McMaster told me that he always thought Chuck to be a good deputy, to be a good sheriff. And that's all I know. That's all I know, that Chuck was a good sheriff. So on that backdrop, we have, over the course of approximately a year, and I know this sounds sensational, but I'm also trying to be as limited in detail as possible to protect the integrity of some of our investigations in the absence of SCSO conducting investigations. We have appeared to uncover an extensive illegal gambling ring that, I mean, it is so in your face. The players involved appear to be a number of very powerful families who, sure enough, have members and kin in the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office. We have furthermore, and I'd report with some confidence here, identified 2 suspects in 2 different cold cases. This is just what we've managed to accomplish over a year. So either Chuck Wright was the most clueless sheriff in South Carolina history, or he knew things and he's complicit.
I'm going to put the over under on that one, Andy. We'll take some bets on that on the side and see see where most of the money goes.
Hey, I've got a great gambling house that we could go hit and place those bets.
Let's put some odds down, man. Let's lay some odds on this. I like it. Well, Andy, we gotta pivot to this political segment here, but man, I got to tell you, every week I say it, every week it's true. I mean, you are holding law enforcement in this state accountable by yourself more than all of the other media outlets here combined. I can't say enough about the work you're doing, man. And
one man army.
I mean, for real, badge has gone bad, folks. We started this thing when Andy came on. We had no idea that it would turn into what it's turned into. And Andy, that is all a credit to your work on this, man. Keep us in the loop, keep us posted. And I'm sure we'll have a carousel next month of well-behaving cops that everyone's doing their job, right?
I mean, I'm sure that they're going to watch this program and they're going to perhaps write spelt WRIGHT the wrongs, of their tenures. And, on Spartanburg, because I mean, there's so much to unpack here. I mean, talk about a Pandora's box. I mean, why is Trey Gowdy in the mix here?
We're going to get into
I would
Trey Gowdy
encourage
in a minute.
folks. Well, I would encourage folks to go read Will the Real Rusty Clevenger Please Stand Up, and we'll see just where his fingers are embedded here in Spartanburg County. Yes, we've got a new sheriff in town, and if we do not see purges like the movie franchise, I think we're going to have a problem. So, yeah, y'all can count on Fitz News to hold some of these boys in blue accountable. And I'm also going to encourage folks to please, please, please reach out to me, whether that be on Facebook or any number of my socials at Real Andy Fancher, or my email, andy@fitznews.com. I mean, yes, we are actively peeling back the veil on decades of institutional corruption in Spartanburg, but the work is so far from over, and we need any and all help possible. I mean, I was talking to actually a trooper yesterday, and I said, I need to get used to having my mind blown every day at just how crazy things can be in Spartanburg. And for folks who do believe, all right, for the few that do believe that it is as corrupt as I'm saying it is in Spartanburg, all right, we need to cozy up to the idea that this does not end at the county line. So again, Andy@fitznews.com. I'm welcoming anybody and everybody.
You heard it from the man, folks. If you got badge gone bad tips, info, let Andy know. We will deep dive and expose those corrupt cops. Excellent work, Andy. I want to bring Dylan Nolan in, our special projects director, the guy who produces this show, the guy who has been with me covering all manner of the political stories here in the Palmetto State over the past month. It has been a hell of a month on the political front, Dylan. I don't know if we've got Andy beat on the badge gone bad carousel as far as the
Usually he definitely
gone
takes
bad.
the insanity award, but I think that we're giving him a run for his money this month.
Yeah, and I don't even know where to start, man. I mean, I guess let's start at the top. Let's start with the governor's race. We've spoken frequently in this show already about Attorney General Alan Wilson. Andy was just holding up a photo of the current governor, Henry McMaster, who is term limited and will not be seeking another term this coming year. So a lot of folks, including Alan Wilson, running for his office, running for governor. But Dylan, it was a huge month here in August for one of those candidates. And I'm referring to 1st District Congresswoman Nancy Mace. I see folks are already wanting the Libra updates. We got them coming.
We're going to get there for you.
We're going to get there. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the month that Nancy Mace had. Dylan, I don't know if it could have gone better for her this month. Give me your assessment of how the political winds favored Nancy Mace here in August.
So I think the biggest surprise in Nancy Mace's favor was U.S. District Court Judge ruling down, Richard Gergel ruling down in Charleston that Nancy Mace was protected when she made the statements she made, accusing her former fiance and multiple of his associates of sexual misconduct from the well of Congress. This was Judge Richard Gergel, appointed by Obama. You can see the books on civil rights he's written and assume that he is definitely not a political ally of Nancy Mace. He, said that he's not adjudicating the facts here, but the law certainly worked out in Nancy Mace's favor, and she was staring down the barrel of some pretty serious civil litigation there.
Yeah, she was.
And it was really not a guarantee at all that this would have worked out in her favor. So to get that ruling, I think that was the biggest thing for her this month. But she's also gotten some great polling. She released a poll which has her up, but also we're seeing some movement from other candidates, which would indicate that their internal polling is showing the same thing. And I think that's a lot bigger of a deal because these candidates will come out all the time with polls that show that they're up. And, certain candidates have released ones that are not credible at all. but you can really tell, okay, does everybody else in the race recalibrate and act as if this person is up? If that's what's happening, then yeah, you can bet that their numbers are actually good. And I think that what we've seen here this month is indicating that Nancy is on the upswing here.
Well, and in fairness to the, obviously, yeah, the poll that was released was her poll. It was from her pollster, but even those who have been her most aggressive enemies online, Wes Donahue, for example, acknowledging that polling outfit, I think it's Meeting Street out of Charleston, great pollsters. Even Wes was like, this is a legitimate number. Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, the reaction from some of the other candidates, including the Attorney General, who has really been unloading on Nancy Mace
because
recently.
She's been throwing stuff at him for months, and his
Months,
strategy
absolutely.
has pretty much been, there was a couple things she responded to, but almost none of this stuff was he really going back and forth with her on when she would accuse him of some pretty serious stuff. This week, his messaging has been far more aggressive. They've been going back and forth over handicap parking spots and this little minutia that people get into when campaigns heat up. But it's definitely a different tone than we've seen between those two to this point in the race.
No, there's no doubt. The campaign of AG Alan Wilson, again, the initial numbers showing him neck and neck with Nancy Mace. One poll would show him a little bit ahead. The other would show her a little bit ahead. But then when Mace's numbers came out showing her with a lead opening up, it has been very clear that the Attorney General has taken a different tack in approaching Nancy Mace's candidacy, much more aggressive. But Dylan, I also want to bring in some of the other candidates in this race, because there was a ton of news this month with some of the other candidates. And I want to start by saying, if you're watching football this weekend, and I think here in South Carolina, that's a lot of folks. That's a lot of folks going to be watching football. Clemson got a big game against LSU up in Death Valley, the real Death Valley. They're in Clemson, South Carolina. And then on Sunday in Atlanta, Shane Beamer's Gamecocks open their campaign against Virginia Tech. Dylan, I know you're going to break down each one.
Go Cox.
There you go. Each one of these position battles. Dylan's football knowledge, folks, off the charts. But if you're watching those games, you're going to see a lot of one candidate in this race, and that candidate is Lieutenant Governor Pamela Yvette. Now, Pam Yvette has been Lieutenant Governor since 2019. She was Henry McMaster's running mate. She has basically built her brand as being a continuation of McMaster's reign here in South Carolina, sort of a continuation of this, very low controversy, sort of status quo type feel. But Pam Yvette dropping, we are told, it could be as much as $1 million on television over the next 30 days. And a big chunk of that, Dylan, is going to hit during these Clemson Carolina football games this weekend. You sat down with Yvette this past month. You interviewed her briefly, but you also dropped a very big story involving her husband, David Yvette, a story that went into some less than savory details regarding his business history. Dylan, tell us a little bit about that story involving the Lieutenant Governor's husband.
So this story takes place at the beginning of this century, or the very end of the last one, when he was operating a payroll firm. He founded this firm, but he eventually took on 2 equity holding business partners. And the details, exactly what went on behind closed doors is unclear. But what I was provided with by a source is a notarized document and an affidavit, which he signed, which he does not contest that he signed, saying that he knowingly stole the funds from the company, funds totaling around $78,000, that he knew it was wrong while he was doing it, and that he was entering into a deal with his 2 business partners whose money he stole to repay them, to make them whole. And I was told by a source who was a witness, who was the notary, and who is related to David, that this deal was cut so that they would be made whole and they would not refer him for criminal prosecution by providing the evidence that they had acquired through the use of a private investigator to put all this information together to the authorities. So they settled it privately, but there is this paper trail that exists 25 years later. And, I share something in common with Lieutenant Governor Yvette, in that she began her career as an accountant. I went to school to be an accountant. And this kind of thing is very disturbing to me when you operate the kind of firm like a payroll firm, where obviously everybody who you're doing business with has to put their trust in you to ethically administer the business. So this kind of thing happening and then staying quiet for 25 years is obviously pretty disturbing.
Well, here's another question. Let me ask you this question. If you are the newly minted 13th Circuit solicitor, Cindy Crick up there in Greenville and Pickens counties, and you are presented with evidence of a crime,
this is going to be really difficult to prosecute. I can tell you this because I spent months trying to track down, make sure that this was real, verify this
Right.
stuff. And so I was looking for every living person that was a witness to this. And you look, one of his business partners is still alive, his former business partners. One of them passed away. The investigator passed away in 2004. His living business partner seemingly has no way to electronically communicate with them. So unless you can go to their physical residence and find them there, you're probably not going to get in contact. But the point is that almost everybody who was involved with this is very elderly or dead.
And this matters too, Dylan, because the business that Pam Yvette and her husband founded together, that story is a huge part of her pitch, that she's a successful businesswoman, that she built this business here. And so that business is a big part of her pitch to be the next governor. Also, it matters
this is the business they founded together directly after he was kicked out of his first firm.
Yeah. No, that's right. And it's also significant because, we filed another story earlier in this campaign cycle about her business, including her husband, embracing a lot of this woke DEI stuff, which she is now kind of dismissing or trying to distance herself from on the campaign trail. And I don't know, Dylan, we were talking about laying some odds in the last segment. I'm going to lay some odds here that I think these two stories, the one that we did on the DEI and then I would argue, much bigger story this week, I think they're going to wind up in some campaign commercials against Pam Yvette if this $1 million that she's dropping.
Well, let me tell you, Nancy Mace's team of 22-year-old, ladies that she brings around with her, they took their Adderall and double dose that morning because they were on top of that within 60 seconds of me making that story live. And obviously there was no communication with them that was
the Mace War Room.
The Mace War Room is drinking double shot espressos, my friend.
Yeah, they're on it. And I think they're going to be busy in the coming month too, Dylan. I don't want to give too much away about some of the stories that we are pursuing. But all I can say is this, folks, if you thought this month was wild for the governor's race, wait until next month. There are going to be some bombshells that drop over the course of the next 30 days that are going to substantially impact the trajectory of this race. And yes, I'm talking about bombshells at the same level as Nancy Mace's scorched earth speech, which has led to all of the fallout that we've seen. But before we get off the governor's race and get into Matt Lieber and all that, I do want to segue, Dylan, with a development in another gubernatorial candidate's court drama. And I'm referring, of course, to Josh Kimbrell, who is a state senator, a second-term state senator, a former radio host. He is based out of Spartanburg County, South Carolina, and he was sued recently by one of his former business partners for stealing $2 million allegedly from this business that they own together. Court filings paint a damning picture of what happened here, Dylan. And in fact, one of those filings was an injunction against him from moving money, from deleting evidence. But this past week here, Dylan, the Kimbrell saga escalated. There was a big court filing. Jen Wood reported on it exclusively on Fitz News, accusing Joshua Kimbrell and his wife of destroying evidence related to this civil case in violation of the judge's order to preserve all this evidence. And so we're talking thousands of emails allegedly destroyed, which had evidence of the alleged theft. And once again, Dylan, we talked earlier about this Yvette story and how that case could be difficult to prosecute given how long ago it was and witnesses may have died or whatever. But this case, we're told, is the focus of an active investigation. And also interesting that one of the notations in the latest civil filings against Josh Kimbrell involved money being routed to political consulting firms. And that is going to be significant as we move forward, because in the Josh Kimbrell saga, we have a connection between Josh Kimbrell, state senator, and Matt Lieber, another state senator who was the big story this month, Dylan. Matt Lieber accused publicly by his wife of an extramarital affair with a paid political consultant, one who has been linked to the trial lawyer lobby. And Dylan, we have received some papers in the last few days documenting a lot of things. We have received, people have followed the money on where this trial lawyer cash has gone, when it was laid out, but more incriminating, perhaps, reports of a private investigator's report, which is going to be attached to at least one divorce proceeding involving an elected official here in South Carolina. And the allegations contained in that report, Dylan, they're going to make people's jaws drop. But all of this stuff that's coming out, Dylan, all of it ties back to, again, this tort debate here in South Carolina that was so contentious during the last few months, that was so contentious. And we saw multiple state senators who had campaigned as conservatives, who had taken positions on this issue. They flip-flop right in the middle of the legislative session. And people are like, wait a minute, what are these conservative candidates doing? Well, we had one of them get on the well of the Senate and say, oh yeah, we're basically bribed. We were basically bribed. And in fact, David Pasco, we're going to talk about him in a minute, the First Circuit solicitor who is running for Attorney General, he was asked about that at his press conference announcing a big anti-corruption agenda, saying, hey, is this the kind of thing you need to investigate? So Dylan, it's starting to catch. It's starting to gather momentum here. And I know you're following it as closely as I am. Where do you think the next steps in this investigation are?
I think it's going to depend what information people provide. I think it's all there. I mean, we have a lot of conversations with folks that don't end up making it to print, or at least, haven't made it to print yet. And clearly there is there. I would like to take this opportunity to encourage, there are people that they know and they can come and share with us. As you say, there's more and more pressure building behind this dam. I think Pasco's candidacy, if he actually makes it into office and even does half of what he was talking about doing in that press conference, that will be shaking the snow globe over there at the State House in a way that is hard for them to even imagine.
Yeah, well, let's talk about some of these forces that you mentioned. I love that analogy, pressure coming behind the dam. It's not just information, whether it's a PI report, whether it's people following the money, whether it's potential witnesses stepping forward and saying, yes, I saw this, or yes, I did that. It's not just that, but there's this other facet of it. And I want to talk about it as it relates to David Pasco, but I also want to talk about it as it relates to Ram Reddy, the founder of Doge SC, who has been very active this month. You and I covered his event with David Pasco in Surfside Beach. But Dylan, in addition to that pressure building behind the dam, we now got some people in the front of the dam willing to take some sledgehammers to this thing. That combination could result in a lot of this coming out. But let's talk about Pasco real quick. You were with me in the State House upper lobby this month, where Pasco rolled out his anti-corruption agenda. What were your thoughts as you were watching that press conference?
If Pasco didn't have the record that he does of actually having gone and carried these prosecutions through to the end, in a situation where he was facing the most resistance that a person can get, he was having everything that Columbia could thrown at him, and he still marched forward. I would think this guy's full of hot air. He's writing a bunch of checks with his mouth that he has no intention of cashing should he make it to office, because that's what most politicians do. They just bloviate and say a bunch of stuff and maybe do 1/10 of it. But Pasco has the record to back up what he was saying he's going to do. And that press conference is live on our YouTube page right now. You can watch him make that pitch. But he's done it. He went and prosecuted the highest level members of the General Assembly that were operating at the time. Those guys who are standing there on the wrong side of the dam, yes, he is standing in front of the dam with a jackhammer, and he's just saying to the voters of South Carolina, let's get this thing fired up.
Indeed. And he's not the only one. Ram Reddy, we were talking about him earlier, Doge SC founder. In fact, we were just provided a fundraising invite. Apparently, Ram Reddy, one of the big donors for a David Pasco fundraiser in Charleston coming up right after Labor Day, when this campaign is really going to heat up. So David Pasco receiving some big support there as he launches his candidacy for Attorney General based on an aggressive anti-corruption agenda. But we also sat down with Ram Reddy this month, Dylan, from Doge SC, our first one-on-one interview with the man.
That
You
feels
were
like it was
there.
half a year ago. This has been a heck of a month, Will.
I know it feels like forever ago. Dylan and I, by the way, a brief, we had not a romantic dinner, a moonlight over the inlet, there at Sarah J's in Garden City, by
I
the
guess
way.
it wasn't romantic, Will. Okay, fair enough.
But great seafood dinner after that Doge event, Sarah J's in Garden City, folks, if you've never been there. But I wanted to bring Rom Reddy up because he is throwing punches.
He's kind of the wild card of South Carolina politics right now. He was one of the biggest donors in the Republican Party as a whole last election cycle. So the fact that he is now splashing around in South Carolina politics means that he is a big fish in this small pond. But he's also relatively new to politics. I mean, this is kind of the first time he's stepped from the checkbook into the arena. And there's a lot of people pulling him in a lot of different directions right now. And it's interesting to see how he's kind of learning how to operate in this swamp.
Well, I wanted to read real quickly because this month saw another example of how South Carolina just habitually, chronically, repetitively rewards failure. And the thing about failure, folks, if you incentivize it, if you encourage it, guess what? You're going to get more of it. You're going to get more failure. And so one of the things that we saw this month, we reported on it exclusively here at Fitz News, was the forced resignation of the CEO of the South Carolina State Ports Authority. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with this entity, it is a government-run political operation. A bunch of political appointees run our port system. And if you haven't been following its performance, you should, because they've been running it into the ground. The Port of Charleston was once the biggest port on the southeast. It is now doubled up by the Port of Savannah. Not only has it lost its place to Savannah, Savannah is now moving twice the containers that Charleston is moving. They literally have doubled us up over the span of a decade and a half, folks. It has been a rapid decline. But the folks presiding over that have been appointed by South Carolina governors, including Nikki Haley, who once famously traded a slot at the primetime Republican National Convention for a huge sellout of our port system. But now we've got Henry, same status quo political hacks in office. And here's what Rom Reddy had to say about him. You got a lot of politicians who will see this thing and they'll give you a soundbite. But here's what Rom Reddy had to say, and I want to quote him here. The people in charge of this mess are appointed by a governor who has wrapped himself in a flag of incompetence and no accountability, as this state lags on every major metric from education to roads to crime, but excels at being highly taxed and big. Dylan, that's the message in a nutshell, man.
Fact check true.
I think I got Dylan.
Point out to me the part of that is false.
That's
That's why I'm excited about
fact check true.
It remains to be seen. I say, just like with this, you reading me, Will? Alrighty, everybody. If it was not clear, our Wi-Fi just went down at the office. That was about all we had for this week's episode of the week or the month in review. So that's what we got for you. We apologize for the technical difficulties, but we hope that everybody enjoyed this stream. This was the first episode that we made available on Facebook. We didn't really advertise that we were going to do that just because we were testing that out, but it went very well, went smoothly. So for the next, couple of months for the forthcoming episodes, this will now be available on Facebook. If that's a better place for you to watch, we encourage you to check out our Facebook page the last Friday of the month at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You will now be able to find this there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a great month.